Okay, David, take it away.
Okay, so this is an historic image from the early 20th century from a plan done for the Toronto Harbour Commissioners. And it shows a lot of different layers associated with Toronto's central waterfront. Obviously, there's the natural heritage layer, or the layer of nature at the foundation of the drawing. One can imagine or extrapolate that there's an Indigenous layer there as well that relates to the natural heritage. Then we see signs of industrialization, of the development of infrastructure, shipping, rail, etc. Also, though, the start of public realm. Whenever I look at this drawing, I'm always inspired because, it shows that we're adding to this layering in our central waterfront, and hopefully our layers will be kind to Mother Nature and to those that see Toronto's waterfront as valuable. So we go to the next slide, please. So mostly what I'm going to be doing this evening is covering the contents of a report that we wrote in October that was considered by the city's executive committee in October, and then by Toronto City Council in November. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about next steps as well. And really our work kind of begins with the information on this slide. We've been at waterfront revitalization collectively, and I mean everyone on this call, for about 20 years. Waterfront revitalization has been an overwhelming success. We've benefited greatly from a tri-government partnership working through Waterfront Toronto to deliver solid social, economic, public realm, and environmental benefits. And one has to thank the governments of Canada and Ontario for their involvement. Through upfront tri-government investment, Toronto is reconnecting with its waterfront. And there are lots of numbers in the report that back up these findings. I won't go through them all. You can read them in the report. They're also found in many documents generated by Waterfront Toronto, its annual plans and its annual reports. But just one number I think is really useful, and that is, to date, the activity sponsored by governments, working with Waterfront Toronto, working with everyone, has generated $13.2 billion of private sector investments. Next slide, please. There is a longer list of partners that are involved in this work. There are the partners that I just spoke about that are involved with waterfront revitalization. So Canada, Ontario, Toronto, Waterfront Toronto. I would include in that Toronto's development community, the public, et cetera, many of the people on this call. There's a longer list of issues that are important in the central waterfront, and lots of agencies, lots of government entities, lots of citizen groups that are involved in all of this. And I won't read them, you can read them for yourselves. And I know I've missed some issues, and I know I missed some people, so apologies for that. But it is kind of, I think, humbling to be part of this larger activity of work that is all about caring for our waterfront. Next slide, please. So this is a timeline, and one could go back even further in time and think about Harbourfront as kind of the first big move to follow the post-industrial changes in our waterfront. But for me, the contemporary period really starts with the publication in 1992 of David Crombie's final report. The final report of the Royal Commission on the Future of the Toronto Waterfront. Those were pretty heady days in terms of thinking about our waterfront, where we discovered ecosystem principles. We thought a lot about watersheds and bioregions, and how watersheds feed into the lake, and how everything along our waterfront is connected. Water to land to air, and so on and so forth. Then in 2000, the Toronto Waterfront Revitalization Task Force report, our Toronto Waterfront, which was the big vision that set the table for what came in 2001, which was the incorporation of Waterfront Toronto, the Toronto Waterfront Revitalization Corporation, but operating as business as Waterfront Toronto. Then in 2003, the completion of the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan, which is now also almost 20 years old, but is still very relevant today. And it's rare in urban planning that plans that are this old are actually still very relevant today. Precinct plans completed in 2005 for the West Don Lands and the East Bayfront, the Pan Am and Para-Pan Am Games that occurred in 2015, the start of Portland's flood protection in 2016 for the quick start, and then 2017 for the full project. The publication in 2017 of the Portland's planning framework, which establishes the framework for the revitalization of the Portlands. And then our most recent report, which probably doesn't deserve equal billing with a lot of the things in this timeline, but it's the most recent, and it's really the launch point for this conversation that's starting tonight. Next, please. This is a timeline of projects that we've been working on and are working on, and it's not an exhaustive list of projects, but it just kind of shows how we're not really at the end, and nor are we at the beginning, but we're kind of halfway through, or or perhaps a little further along with a lot more project or a lot more work to do. The stuff that is happening in the West Don Lands, the East Bayfront, is very exciting. The stuff that has happened, but there's much more to come. If I can go to the next slide, please. So this project is well known to everybody here, and it's occupying obviously a lot of our time, a lot of our collective time. I spent several hours on this project today. The project that will flood protect large sections of the port and the south of eastern area from the Hurricane Hazel storm, and will unlock development in the Portlands and south of eastern areas through the construction of a new river valley and enabling related enabling infrastructure. Completion is targeted for 2024, although there will still be monitoring and warranties work to do. It's pretty exciting. I had my staff team down last week. We were lucky enough to have a tour from Waterfront Toronto staff, and it's just unbelievable when you get into the middle of it and you see the scale of it and the progress that's been made. Next, please. And just some slides that show that, but the slides or the pictures don't really do it justice. We'll have to wait and actually see and touch and feel the results when they come. Anyway, with completion targeted for 2024, we've been thinking a lot about what's next, and that's really where the next series of slides begin. So if we could move on. So the original vision for the waterfront was published in that 2000 report, Our Toronto Waterfront, led to the establishment of Waterfront Toronto. We talked about that, and plans such as the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan and the related precinct plans. The original vision remains relevant, but it could be updated to reflect contemporary issues and priorities. And I think there's also the sense that a lot of the folks who were involved back in 2000 have moved on. They've retired, or they've moved on to other things. And I think there's the sense that there's some utility in having a look at that original vision and thinking about what's still relevant and what might be updated. If I can go to the next slide, please. So, we've come to the conclusion that it does make sense to engage the public and stakeholders in an exercise to have a look at a renewed vision, to guide the further evolution of Toronto's waterfront, to inform future tri-government decision-making, and then to make sure that economic, social, and environmental priorities and outcomes are aligned with approved plans and future projects. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that we used in our report, and it tables some emerging priorities and outcomes. So in the inner circle are a series of 4 priorities: equity and inclusion, building back stronger, Indigenous engagement and reconciliation, and partnerships, collaboration, and innovation. And then in the outer circle, a series of possible outcomes related to housing, related to jobs and economic growth, environment, climate change and resilience, and infrastructure, transit, public realm, and complete communities. And just that list on the side are some things that perhaps we weren't thinking about 20 years ago, as the our Toronto Waterfront document was in its formation. We can go to the next slide, please. So some emerging themes, and these are really economic development themes, or so they seem on the surface. But really, they're all about attracting and retaining talent in the current global economy. You know, where Toronto is competing with cities like Chicago, New York, global cities, and a lot of it is about attracting talent to knowledge-based industries as a way of driving economic growth, but also as a way to drive social and environmental outcomes. And so we've notionally earmarked 3 themes that could be foundation for building on: climate action and clean tech, which is, you know, really built into Portland's flood protection and a lot of the work that Waterfront Toronto's been doing in recent years. The city of Toronto as well, through its green building standard. Culture and creative industries, and you see those industries in the waterfront already in terms of culture and tourism, but also in terms of film, digital media, and television. And then health and well-being, and we have a discovery district which is based on hospitals and research facilities and businesses, and they're at capacity, and maybe there's the opportunity for a satellite campus in the waterfront. So we've recruited a panel of experts to provide us with some advice on how these themes might be built out and how they might help us achieve some of the, again, social and environmental outcomes that we've been talking about. If I can just go to the next slide. So one of the things we also want to explore with everyone is the wider waterfront. And, you know, we've been focused pretty much on the central waterfront, or in technical terms, the designated waterfront area for the last 20 years or so. But there is, you know, the opportunity to think bigger in terms of the waterfront, thinking about the western and eastern waterfronts and how they connect to the city's watersheds. And there, you know, there is work in these areas, but it hasn't been coordinated, perhaps, to the extent that the work in the central waterfront has been coordinated. And ideally, we'd be able to package some projects that might be more suitable for infrastructure funding programs and other related resources. Not to reinvent the wheel, because, you know, there is great work that's been done by the TRCA, by the Parks Department, Toronto Water, community organizations, etc. But to see if we can bring more attention and more focus to the work and to have more work done. Just a list of types of projects that this could involve: park, natural heritage, shoreline resilience, and active transportation. And then the next slide is just a graphic of the wider waterfront. And I, you know, personally, I've been exploring this quite a bit. I mean, I've always known the wider waterfront, but I've made a bit of a habit of riding my bike west to the Mississauga border, and in fact to Port Credit. And then in the east, trying to get out to see, get to know the eastern beaches better, Bluffers Park better, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot to see and do in this city. Next slide, please. So next up for us is public consultation and stakeholder engagement related to some of the things that I've been talking about. If we go to the next slide, please. And of course, there's been lots of consultation over the years. Waterfront Toronto has been particularly good at it. And the city working with Waterfront Toronto. But we're going to do a fairly exhaustive public consultation and stakeholder engagement process associated with this report that was just approved by council in anticipation of a report back at the end of Q1 of next year. And if I can go to the next slide, this will include Indigenous engagement with Indigenous rights holders and also people and organizations that represent First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I think there's the sense that we want to be, we want this consultation or this engagement to be, Indigenous engagement to be early and comprehensive, and perhaps ideally more comprehensive than it's ever been. To the next slide. Some bullets on next steps. So the engagement that we've talked about, and some engagement specifically on Villiers Island and the Portlands. And then 2 reports back, at least 2 in the first half of 2022, one on the results of public consultation and Indigenous engagement on a proposed renewed vision, and one on an update on Villiers Island business and implementation planning. And I'll just finish on the next slide, which is a series of questions, which could be the questions that you might want to comment on or think about in the discussion that follows. What are your thoughts on the emerging priorities, outcomes, and themes? What projects or types of projects would be aligned with these emerging priorities, outcomes, and themes? What are the opportunities associated with the wider waterfront? Walter Kim just flashed an opportunity in the chat. Hello, Walter. And then finally, who else should we be talking to in the coming months and beyond that about these topics? Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I appreciate that immensely.
I just want to start by thanking Ed Hoare and Waterfront for All for the invitation. And I always look forward to engaging. In fact, the last 20 years, a lot of our success has actually been engaging with groups like Waterfront for All. And David, I just want to thank you. That was a great setup in terms of the discussion going forward with regards to what Waterfront Toronto has done and why we should believe that Waterfront Toronto should continue to deliver on the waterfront looking forward. So, I'm going to start with this one slide, which, as David pointed out, we've got these beautiful bridges, and this really reflects a bit on Waterfront Toronto, which has really succeeded because of its ability to connect things and to connect with the communities and to bring those communities together. And I think this has been historically one of the key things to Waterfront Toronto's success. Edward, if we go to the next slide. One of the key things for any build out is infrastructure. And, as David pointed out, and if you go into the report, there's been over $2.7 billion brought to the waterfront through our 3 funding partners, the 3 levels of government. So that in itself is an important part, that that build out could not have occurred without that kind of vision, which was created, and a bit of the documentation that David shared with you. And I give Bob Fung and former Mayor Crombie and John Campbell, the previous CEO, a lot of credit for engaging the public in that vision. But that infrastructure is foundational for us to build out the types of communities and to identify and build on really the social policy goals that were mandated for Waterfront Toronto. And we look back on, there's lots of slides that you can look at on either our website or some of the ones David showed of what this looked like 20 years ago and what it looks like today. So I think there's huge opportunities, and those opportunities really build on past success. So we'll go to the next slide if we can. And as I said, I think Waterfront Toronto, one of the key brands it has is its ability to engage the public. And here's just one of the many activities we engage in the community. But that information really has helped in the buy-in with regards to the developments. And whether it's some of those historical projects, I know we presented to this group on Love Park and some of the other projects in the area. And it's really important for us to hear the voices. And I think we have a reputation of not just engaging, but listening. And I think that's been a critical aspect of our success in the past. So I think, again, one of the things that we probably have to build more on is educating the public of who actually uses the waterfront. There is this perception when I first came aboard by a few people who engaged with me who had this view that the waterfront was this enclave of the rich, and it's actually the opposite. If you look at the people, we're at 20 Bay, our parking lot is full with people traveling on the waterfront or to the islands. And those are often immigrants or middle class, lower income individuals who can't afford to go to a cottage. So the waterfront historically has played the role of that cottage in place to go for those people who can't afford to go elsewhere. And that's why public realm, as David talked about, is so important as we build out. And I'll touch on that a little more. But again, I think one of the things we have to do is really educate people travel from all over the city, from other parts of the province to utilize the water features. And we'll talk a bit about more about both land development and water usage as we go forward. Next slide. And we do have a vision. People often say, well, what's the vision? And we have a 5-year plan that really speaks to the vision to build on the mandate that we were given 20 years ago. And as one of the reports actually is entitled, it's probably more relevant now than ever. And I'll touch on those. But these 5-year plans, and there'll be another one coming out shortly. We're bringing the next one to the board in December. They're 5-year plans that get updated annually. So it's a good read. It's an easy read. It isn't as technical as some 5-year strategies. So I would strongly recommend people take a look. And really emphasizes the build out, in particular, what the public really wants going forward. And post-pandemic, we got to listen to the public as we looked at Quayside and looked at the next phases, including Villiers coming forward. And what we heard is, people are interested in the things that I'm going to speak to: affordable housing, more public space for people to enjoy, more trails, opportunities for equity within that. And I'll touch on, not only what we want to do, but what we've already done in some of these areas. So we'll go to the next slide. And I'll just touch on some of the major projects. As David said, unless you actually visit the Portland's Flood Protection Project, you really don't realize just how complex and massive this project is. The 3 levels of government, I give them credit, they put $1.2 billion forward to really create this flood protection project, but it's more than that. It's no different than the project that Waterfront Toronto was involved in at Corktown Common, which created not only flood protection for the West Donlands and East Bayfront and areas, but it created great park space. But, the one thing that we're very good at is getting multiple uses out of our infrastructure. So not only is it a berm that protects from flooding, but it's a fantastic park. And you'll see we've got a lot of the same principles as we go further south on the river and look at this project. But this is an enormous project. It's one of the biggest and more complex infrastructure projects in North America. And, you know, I'm going to brag about my staff, not necessarily about me, but they've delivered this project on time and on budget and during a COVID pandemic. So lots to be proud of. And if you get a chance, and hopefully in the near future, you know, the public will get more opportunities to visit once we get through the pandemic challenges. And it really is something else. And we have a third bridge that'll be coming, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes. But that bridge will arrive sometime probably in the first week of December. If people recall, the first bridge which was pretty iconic. The second bridge had two halves that arrived over the past year, and that's one big bridge. And now the third bridge will be coming. We're hoping to have an event to welcome that bridge, but the flood protection project has really created enormous opportunities for the rest of the Portlands, and we'll speak to that in a moment. Let's go to the next slide. And we've, you know, historically we've focused on the land development, and we had a marine strategy back in 2006. We worked with our partners, you know, Ports Toronto, the Conservation Authority in the city, among others, to update that marine strategy. And really, there's a huge opportunity here for looking at how do we better utilize the water, and you know, really complement the developments on the land with proper water usages. That includes moving people and product. It includes mooring, and it also includes management and having a more coordinated authority to look at how do we actually manage usage of the waterfront. We hear a lot of complaints with some of the challenges with certain boats on the water, the lack of mooring space along the docks, and lack of overall coordination to maintain this. So, you know, we have a strategy going forward, and that really helps to lead into the next discussion, which is how do we better activate the waterfront to make it world class, and to also create the opportunities for the public to deal with climate change and deal with some adaptation by enjoying the water as well. And that kind of leads to the next slide, which is Parliament SLIP. And, you know, our board approved this a number of months ago. We're looking at contributions, additional contributions from the city and, city from the province and the federal government of about $25 million each to make this a world-class SLIP where the public would get access to this. It's free with the utilization of pools. There will be launch points for kayaks and canoes. The intent of having some electric boats. Also creating a more permanent dock, a floating dock that have concessions and a restaurant, more mooring space, and you can see the finger piers that we'd like to have so that we can actually have more mooring, and also spaces for water taxis to go not just across to the islands, but up and down the coast so that we can actually move people without putting them on the road. And then we'll go to the next slide. I think Pina's spoken to this. So we've spoken a number of times about Quayside. A lot of people are familiar with this. It's 12 acres that we're developing. We went through an RFQ and RFP process. We have 4 finalists that have submitted their final proposals. We're reviewing those currently, and we hopefully will have a decision by the end of February on this very exciting piece of property. And again, on this property, it builds on, you know, the mandate that we had before, which was really affordable housing. So there'll be over 800 units here, green building standards. So, you know, I'll be speaking to that again, but we're incorporating that in this development. And it really starts to build on a more aggressive green building standard that we intend to apply in the Villiers development as well. So this is a great test bed for advancing green standards even further. Let's go to the next slide. And that really leads to the climate positive. Now we'll stay on the climate positive one back again for a sec. And that, you know, I'm going to speak to this when I get to Villiers, but we really see Villiers, and this was, in the secondary plan, and as we work with the city and develop not only council's vision, but a collective vision on developing Villiers out with our partners at Create TO in the city, and hopefully with the other two levels of government. This is a perfect opportunity to have our first climate positive community where we advance the building standards, the transit requirements, and really have the first community that contributes a positive environmental impact. So huge opportunities here. We have a plan with our partners to do this, and we'll be advancing that in the coming years as we look to advance plans for Villiers. So let's go to the next. And I saw the slide on transit. We built that out on Queens Quay West. This is an important part as we build it not only on Queens Quay East, but down into the Portlands, not only for the public to be able to get back and forth to employment opportunities, et cetera, but it's a critical piece if we're trying to attract large employers, large and small employers, but really creative employers. And one of the things that we've heard from employers as we try to encourage them to locate on the waterfront is we need transit to be able to make sure that their workers get to and from the workplace. So this will be critical, not only for the climate agenda, but also with regards to our economic agenda going forward. Next slide. And, this is a bit of a rendering of Villiers going forward. So you can see, we're going to build a complete community, hopefully a climate positive community. As you can see, it'll be mixed use in the middle. We have 4 bridges at the end of the day that will connect these parts into the downtown core, but also now that we're twinning a river, and when we talk about the complexity, I always start off when I talk about the Portland's flood protection project as being a very simple project of redirecting a river, building an island, building a community, connecting that community, pretty simple things, right? So obviously being a little sarcastic there, it is a very complex, but a very promising project. And we'll talk a bit about the green space because that's one of the things we heard from the public. We want parks that they can enjoy. And I'll go to the next slide and talk a bit about building on the parks that we've had to one of our signature projects that we're looking to fundraise for. And that's just a destination playground. And this will be a huge opportunity to draw not only opportunities for families to come down to the waterfront, but similar types of parks that have been built in Maggie Daly Park, for example, in Chicago. There's a park that was just built in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which originally was targeting 500,000 people the first year and had 2.5 million people show. So we've got an opportunity here, not only to be creative and create more space, but to be creative on how we keep our children active and an opportunity to really make this a world-class tourist attraction on top of being a community activity. So we'll go to the next slide. Accessibility and inclusion is a big part of our mandate. We want to make sure everybody gets the opportunity to enjoy affordable housing. As we look at Villiers and Quayside, affordable housing will be even more important with regards to the issues that we're hearing and politicians are hearing and ran on in their election campaigns. So we're hopefully looking to go even deeper into affordable housing as we build out the rest of the Portlands. And I think I already said there'd be 800 units over on Quayside, over 1,000 that we anticipate building on Villiers. And let's go to the next slide. The green building standards, we put out new green building standards that will be even more aggressive. We had great success in our past mandate. Waterfront Toronto really pushed for the first LEEDs Gold buildings on the waterfront. And to give credit to, for example, Hines and Tridel, we are now seeing platinum certified buildings on the waterfront. We want to build on that. I think, platinum's good, but it's not where we need to be in the future. And we need to build out as technologies advance. So I think as I said, I think, Hines and Tridel have done a great job. They've advanced this on their own agenda, quite frankly, as we pushed for at least gold. They took it to platinum, and I want to recognize them for that. But we've got to do more as we build out and as we're now collectively trying to manage adaptation strategies to deal with our climate challenges. Next slide. Accessibility standards. This is another big issue that we need to deal with. We need to make sure that if everyone is going to be welcome to the waterfront, everybody needs to be welcomed with the type of accessibility that's required. And we've actually we put together an advisory group with some of the key accessibility advisors from around the city. And we want to advance this as one of the primary goals as we build out not only Quayside, but the rest of the waterfront. So this is going to lead into what we are calling an accessibility framework that'll help guide us and really advance the opportunities for everybody to enjoy the waterfront equally. So let's go to the next slide. Indigenous engagement. I think I said some time ago, throughout my career, I've always said, don't listen to what I say, but watch what I do. And I think that's what I would say about Waterfront Toronto as well. We've talked to a lot of these priorities, but we've delivered on these. And we've built a strong MOU with the Mississaugas of the Credit, which is the treaty rights holders to lands in this area. But we've also, as you can see here, this is AHT in the West Don lands. We've done training for our staff on Indigenous culture and safety. We've actually brought Indigenous advisors in to help us, quite frankly, look at the archaeological dig in the West Don lands to help with regards to the design of the public areas and on design, actually, as we added Matthew Hickey to our design review panel. We're going to continue to build on that relationship, both with the Mississaugas and the urban Indigenous groups. So lots of progress, but we're not satisfied yet. More to come. Let's go to the next slide. And the Artists in Residence program, we have for the first time put an Artist in Residency program out, and that was with the support of the Waterfront BIA. We have been very lucky to actually have our Black artists group in Canada that was our first successful candidates in that competition. And they're really there to help us activate some of the underutilized areas of the waterfront with some great art. And over the next, I think it was 16 months, 18 months that we have that Artist in Residency program. They've already contributed quite a bit to some thoughtful art on the waterfront. And I think this, and let's go to the next one, which is another piece, sculpture on the waterfront that has really started to engage and activate not only the public realm, but creating opportunity for some of our artists, and in particular, some of our minority groups that have the ability to express themselves through art. So I think we'll go to the next slide. And this is really just to end, and I want to leave time for the discussion part. I guess the point here is Waterfront Toronto has been and has proven itself over the last 20 years to not only develop the waterfront with the voices of the public, but to be innovative and really forward-looking with regards to the needs of the future. I think there are huge opportunities. The city has been a big advocate for us going forward. We look forward to engaging with the strategic review that is underway with 3 levels of government. I think that KPMG identified in its stakeholder discussions and survey that there's a strong feeling of the community that Waterfront has contributed, in particular in the last 5 years, and really should be renewed in terms of that vision. And obviously, one of the outstanding points that David pointed out, not only the vision, but the funding to help support that vision. So we're looking forward to governments hopefully coming to the table to support a renewed vision going forward, and that Waterfront Toronto would be a foundational piece of that vision. So I think I'll just turn it back to Ed or to whoever's going to take the next piece.
Thank you very much, George. Very much appreciate that. So now I'd like to call on Ed Hoare, the chair of Waterfront for All, to lead off with a response, question, comment, response.
Great.
And here we go.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was really great and inspiring thought. I guess my general question would be, David, you were talking about the entire stretch of the waterfront, which is, I think, might be 43 kilometers or something like that. So a good long stretch. And then you had a slide that showed the designated waterfront area as being this rather smallish area in the central waterfront. Now, in that area, that includes Ontario Place, and includes the CNE, and yet Waterfront Toronto has not really been involved in developing those areas. Just west of the DWA, we get Humber Bay. Walter Kam, I think, put a comment up just now mentioning the great potential that area seems to have. And there we seem to have some of the problems that beset the waterfront in years past, 20 years ago, where you have Ontario's in charge of Ontario Place, and it's kind of the city in charge of the CNE, and then it's unclear who's really controlling the wall and the seawall and the area in Humber Bay and so on. And there are different visions seemingly from different levels of government in conflict. It's kind of like the way it was in the Central Waterfront back in the 90s before the Robert Fung report. The great achievement of Waterfront Toronto seems to have been that it has managed somehow to create consensus among different levels of government, which change over time through public consultations. It gets everybody kind of moving together and it delivers projects so that things actually have clearly got done over 20 years. Is it time to extend that model westwards from the central area to include, as it seems to have been the original 10 Ontario Place and the CNE and possibly Humber Bay right out to Don River? And similarly in the area around Leicester Street Spit, we've got major landfill on the east side of the Spit that's being created by TRCA now. And there are going to be issues presumably about how that land should be developed and what it should be for. Is it time to take the Waterfront Toronto model, which seems to have worked, and to kind of expand it geographically at either end or not? I know you're an advocate, maybe, George, but if you think that might be a good idea, could you give us the pitch why it is, if you think it is?
You're asking me or David now?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
Both of you will weigh in.
Well, here's what I'll jump in and I'll let David answer. You know what? I have ongoing discussions with a lot of the CEOs along the waterfront, but also with the province, with their Deputy Minister for Infrastructure and with their CEO for Infrastructure Ontario. I've always said, that's their project. Any way we can help, we're at the table willing to help. I'm not advocating for us taking over anybody else's projects, but we have learned a lot of lessons. In particular, as you build on water, there are a lot of challenges, and we're always available. And I think the board chair and myself have been pretty open that, we're here to help all of our government partners on any of the projects. But frankly, Ed, I've got enough on my plate, but if I can help, I think the corporation would be happy to help in any way.
David?
Yeah, I mean,
city's perspective, one of the owners, one of the three owners, Waterfront Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we need to be looking at everything, at what the different options are. the central waterfront is very different from the eastern and western waterfronts in the sense that the central waterfront is a brownfields or a revitalization exercise where we're redeveloping districts, former industrial lands, turning that into mixed-use neighborhoods, adding the public realm, the affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera. Like that is one type of work that needs to be done. Elsewhere in the waterfront, it's a very different exercise. Like we're dealing with park improvements, possibly. We're dealing with trails and active transportation assets. We're dealing with water and shorelines and dock walls, and they don't necessarily have the economic drivers. There isn't the land to be redeveloped into commercial or residential and so on. So the math is a bit different, probably, although we haven't explored that in depth. There are potentially different things going on. I do see a huge role in the wider waterfront for Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. And I see a huge role for existing city divisions that do park land very well, ravines and natural areas very well, water and stormwater projects very well. We'll see.
Okay, great. I have another question that has to do with philanthropy. There's been more and more stress in that, and in the recent report that I think you by and large wrote, David, in October, there's a lot of mention of kind of fine-tuning the philanthropy model by making tax breaks available and things like that. And I guess I know we've been hearing about that for a number of years. And I guess I would be interested in hearing your comments from both of you as to how's that going? Is that going as well as you hoped, 2 or 3 years ago, or what? Are we still gathering momentum on that? Where do you think we're going to get with that? Is that going to work?
Yeah, maybe I can warm things up and George can finish on this. I would say that the waterfront is just getting started. And the approval that was built into the staff report that we wrote, was critical to them getting started in earnest. I think the Bentway is kind of an interesting model in the sense that whereas previously people were giving money to our hospitals and to our museums and to our educational facilities, people are now open to the idea of contributing to the public realm and to public open space. And that's very exciting. And I'm hoping that Waterfront Toronto is able to take advantage of that kind of momentum created by the gesture made by the Matthews family. Over to you, George.
Yeah, I think we're making progress. One of the recommendations, obviously, of the Auditor General was to get other sources of funding, and that led to us seeking charitable status. We got that. And we recently, and credit to David and the staff report, we had approval to actually finally accept revenue in that staff report, because that was one of the things holding us back. We have started conversations with potential philanthropists, but we actually couldn't accept their money until the 3 levels of government gave us that authority. We'd had the approval from the province and the feds, and we just got the city approval. So, I think we're just getting started. We are, we recently hired an executive director in the area of philanthropy. We've started engaging some of the philanthropists in the city just to, educate ourselves how to best go about it. And we've gotten some very strong interest that hopefully will translate into some fantastic developments on the waterfront. So I think, we're building momentum.
I'm going to ask one more question, and that was, it was actually suggested by Carolyn Johnson, I think, in the chat, who's a friend of mine from York Key Neighborhood Association. She was mentioning the big nightclub at Polson Pier and saying, I think something to the effect of how long will such institutions be there? There was recently quite lengthy litigation that I was involved in there. And I think our intent was to sort of try to keep it at least the same keep balance, keep it from not getting bigger and louder and noisier. But it is an area that's in transition over there. Do you expect that there would be a big nightclub over there that for thousands of people in the future, or what do you think will happen there?
That to me or to David? I'll just jump in. I think, I think last time I met, I always said, look, we want to activate the waterfront, but trying to create communities that are both safe and reduce nuisance is a big part of this. So, I think that'll be an important discussion as we engage with the public in developing the rest of the waterfront. But, hopefully there are some other uses as we develop out the land that it'd be more acceptable to the public. But, entertainment is always going to be something that draws people to it. The question is what other regulations are put in place to try to address that, right? I don't know, David, if you want to comment.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I am no expert on regulating nightclubs, whether it's through zoning or other tools. I suspect you know far more about this than I do. I will say that in city staff and I know many of the councillors that we're very open to hearing from you about how to prevent similar businesses from creating the same kind of externalities.
Yeah. Okay, well that's great. I'm going to turn the floor over to somebody else, hopefully with some good questions.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate that immensely. Ron Jenkins, I think you've been glancing at the chat. We have a lot of comments, questions, etc.
Yes, what I thought I would do is I'd take the chat remarks that are clearly questions and put them forward. The first among these was from Liz McGrarty, saying she'd like to know how many Indigenous persons are working with what organization on what issues on the waterfront. I think George answered that in part, but she wondered, are they overwhelmed by the number of non-Indigenous persons? And she said she was thinking of the fill-in of the Yonge and Parliament Street slips and where the consent comes from. Is it just that we all recognize the Indigenous lands and they have no say? Question mark there.
Yeah, so let me just start with, we have a number of Indigenous members through both the Mississaugas and other Mi'kmaq and other organizations working with us on some of the designs, etc. With regards to the organization itself, one of the things we are doing, we've just hired an outside consultant to work with us on our diversity, inclusion, and equity, looking at internally the organization itself. Do we have an organization that reflects the community that we serve, and what can we do to improve on that? So that is a project that is just underway, but also to look at the stakeholders that we engage with. Are they as broad a group of stakeholders as we should be engaging? So, in addition to, having as much feedback as we can, and as I said, I think we have a good reputation of engagement. Could we do better? Absolutely. Are we trying to identify those groups? Yes. And hopefully in the next little while, we'll have some advice that's supplied both to management and to the board that will advance us in making sure we have the right voices at the table.
Thank you. I have the next couple of questions that are really, I think they can be bundled together. One is from Maureen Aslin and one's from Carolyn Johnson. The questions go, with climate change, will there be a reevaluation of the storm parameters? And related to that, is the flooding of Hurricane Hazel still a good high mark? We need flood mapping based on climate change parameters, like what happened in Merritt, etc.
I can answer that, I think,
yeah.
Which is that for Portland's flood protection, there was a buffer built in to allow for climate change. So the flood protection is not to the level Hurricane Hazel, or otherwise known as the regional storm, it's to that level plus, and I believe the amount is 0.5 meter to account for the additional flows that will result from climate change related impacts. One thing, though, that we've been grappling with is rising lake levels and what they'll mean. And we've made a few improvisations on the fly through Portland's flood protection, Waterfront Toronto staff have, around rising lake levels and better protecting the infrastructure from the lake.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, David. I also have a question again for David. This one's from Steve Monroe. He says, the recent report to council was silent on the transit project for the Eastern Waterfront, something that was expected this fall. What is the status of this component of the overall project?
Yeah, it was silent because we're expecting a separate report specifically on transit, and I don't know the timing of that exactly, but I'm hearing that it's early 2022, there's no debating the importance of transit to the communities that are under construction. Currently in the East Bayfront, and the ones that we hope to build out in Villiers Island and elsewhere in the future. And we understand the importance of transit. We're trying to make it work. So,
all right. The next question I see here is from Cynthia Wilkie, who says that she was dismayed to see a rendering of the future plans for the media hub in the Portlands. The rendering showed a row of sound stages running along the north edge of the ship channel with blank walls facing the water behind security fences. There was provision for a pedestrian promenade along the edge of the ship channel, but nothing behind to animate or extend the enjoyment of this incredible feature into a mixed-use development. Is the city looking at any way to ensure that the actual development of the media hub provides a better connection to the ship channel? Is there any possibility of incorporating some variation in the setbacks along the ship channel to allow for more civic use of the ship channel?
So my understanding is that no development applications have been filed for that project. What we had was an announcement about a studio locating in the Portlands, which is a good thing. Good thing for the film, television, and digital media industries in the area. They'll be going through at a minimum site plan approval, perhaps other development application processes as well. And I think all of those issues will be tabled through due process.
All right. Something from Jane Anderson saying there's an opportunity to connect the West Waterfront Trail to the east, connect the Martin Goodman Trail and the beaches to the Scarborough East Trail, making a truly continuous waterfront for all to enjoy. That's not really much in the form of a question, more as an observation. But I guess the question is that opportunity in mind?
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in on this. Yeah, I mean, we continue to look at expanding our trails and better improving the quality of the trails. So, I would just support the comment that, yes, I think there are opportunities, and it's a matter of kind of making our way through which areas need what improvements to advance that.
Mm-hmm. This is a comment from Julie Beddoes that I think already maybe you've addressed in answer to Ed Hoare. She says, I'd like to see Waterfront Toronto consultation staff do more reach out beyond downtown. And I think that's a great point. I know even prior to my arrival, when they were looking at Quayside, they started to look, they had a few sessions north of the city. I think that's a great point. We need to not only get feedback from other parts of the city, but broader regional and even provincial representation. 2/3 of our money is coming in from the province and from the feds. So I think,
we want to make sure not only have we taken into account the interests of the community itself in the surrounding area, but also those who are helping pay to advance this agenda as well.
All right. From Dale Taylor, he says, Drew Sinclair, SVN Architects and Planners, and I have proposed to co-partner with Indigenous to situate a World Freshwater Center along the Toronto waterfront for some years. We prefer reusing the pods at Ontario Place, but this could be situated at other locations. But could this be situated at other locations in the East Waterfront? Is there sites there for a new and major waterfront attraction and learning center there in the center of the world's largest freshwater supply?
David, you want to go first or you want me to?
Either way, you go. Why don't you go?
Okay. We continue to look at opportunities to build on, quite frankly, Indigenous partnerships. I can't speak specifically to the request of that project, but I think there are opportunities to build out. And we really are in an earlier presentation that David referenced when we had all the waterfront partners at the table with the city manager. I shared a vision where we looked at in particular the eastern part of the waterfront really being protected more on an environmental zone, and that includes obviously the baseline area and the Tommy Thompson Park. But working with the Indigenous communities, in particular around the mouth of the Don River as it comes down, just makes a lot of sense to look at what could be done there. So maybe I'm not answering the specific question, but I think there are opportunities.
Right.
Oh,
And-
Ron,
Yes.
if I could just weigh in on that, and I was involved in a previous career in the adaptive reuse of the Don Valley Brickworks property, the industrial buildings is Evergreen Brickworks. So, I mean, I would say based on that experience that there's like no shortage of good sites, interesting sites for cultural facilities, educational facilities, etc. And there's no question that when you go, across the world and to great cities like Amsterdam and Boston and San Francisco, they have these types of places. The one described by by the person that asked the question. The challenge is funding, always funding, and projects have to bring funding with them, but the opportunities do exist in the waterfront.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what, I'm going to just add one more thing. The other thing we're looking for is projects on the waterfront that activate the waterfront 12 months a year. And that's why the cultural centers would be a prime example. When you look around the waterfronts, the best waterfronts around the world, they often have museums and cultural centers where people can enjoy themselves no matter what the climate is. So both the Indigenous and activating 12 months a year are priorities for us looking forward.
I think in a similar vein, Harry Lawton, who is unfortunately not able to stay for the end of the meeting here, is asking about whether the planetarium closed in 1995 could be revived in some way down on the waterfront. He's put some links into to further the discussion, and they're in the chat, so I guess we can follow those up at a later date.
Yeah, we'd be happy. There are a number of interim uses that we've been looking at in terms of what could be brought down to activate the waterfront, and the planetarium has been referenced before.
Mm-hmm. A couple of people are asking in the areas of canoes and kayaks. Alex Turanu and Christopher Herbert. Alex saying he's thinking about sustainable water mobility, including sailing, kayaks, canoes, and so on, is very much appreciated, not just motorboats or yachts for the wealthy. And Christopher Herbert is following that with a comment saying canoe and kayak launch is interesting. However, is the idea that people would carry their boats from their cars to launch them from that dock, or would there be storage on site?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been looking at that issue when we engaged with the public around Parliament Slip. That was one of the issues that have been raised. So we are looking at what's the opportunity for storage. Obviously, also for anybody who's commuting in, you know, an easy drop-off area as well. And then, you know, there will probably be a vendor in that area as well that may provide for kayaks and canoes. So I think all possibilities are on the table, and that'll be part of the consultation as we refine the design.
Okay, another question. I think it's probably it was synchronized to your presentation on affordable housing. The question is, what is the definition of affordable? Is it the current definition, 80% of market value?
I don't do anything. I don't go to any meeting about affordable housing without having someone from the Housing Secretariat there. So, you know, I think from a city perspective, we followed their lead, the lead that's established by council. And, you know, I have to say that city council is seized these days with the affordable housing imperative.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I would add is we've been working, as David said, very closely with the Housing Secretariat. The one thing that we are looking at is ensuring that we have more family units. That is one of the big gaps that we see throughout the city. And in particular, if we want to create a complete community with families down on the waterfront, we have to actually have affordable units that are family oriented. So that's one of the things we're doing. May not address the exact question that you brought forward, but there's a multitude of issues as we look at affordable housing.
All right. Another question here from Carolyn Johnson saying, can you get rid of nightclubs at Polson Pier and noisy party boats? I guess
I'm going to leave that one for David, I'd say.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not a specialist.
I think that, in fact, Ed Hoare is familiar to some degree with the nightclub issues at Polson Pier. I don't know if you want to speak for a second on that, Ed.
Well, that was in fact the question that I was raising earlier. Basically, was what is the future hold for the big nightclub there? I mean, my own view is we shouldn't let it get bigger and louder. On the other hand, I also agree kind of with George that, you know, entertainment venues are significant. It's all a question of scale and of getting the details right.
Okay.
And Ed, thank you for taking that on. I know lots of people have probably told you that very recently, but I remember having a conversation with you about this issue 2 or 3 years ago. And at the time, it seemed like
5
such
years.
yeah,
It's almost 5 years. Anyway, thank you very much.
It's been a long time, so thanks for that.
And the only thing I would add to that, and it goes back to the discussion I even introduced on the marine strategy, you know, there is a begging of really a little more, I won't say just regulatory, but certain structure around uses on the waterfront and on the water as well, right? So we continue to hear about boat cruises and others that, you know, continue to party through till 2 a.m. in the morning. And, you know, that creates its own issues as well. So I think one of the key points is we need to, as a collective body, bring the right players to a table to talk about how are we, other waterfronts look to regulate users maybe a little more than we do. I think it's one of the things we have to look at is how do we get input from the public and from those users as well, and how do we find the right balance?
Yeah, it's quite
sorry, can I just weigh in on that for 1 second?
Sure.
Hi, everybody. Edward Nixon here. George, many people have mentioned this, and I know that it's been something that Waterfront for All we've talked about, and I think you raise an interesting point. I mean, part of it, I remember, and it's probably, you can probably relate to this. I remember I was doing some work with Go Transit a number of years on their Union Station Rail Corridor Infrastructure Program, right? And we had complaints because literally, and they were usually male humans working on the tracks, and of course they had to do the work late at night, 2 in the morning, you know, weekends, because the trains run during the day. And we had complaints from some of the neighboring condos, which, as you know, on the west side of downtown, are right on the tracks, that people were, using rather foul language at 4 a.m. because somebody dropped, a wrench or something on their toe or something happened, and not realizing that people had their windows open and the sound went straight up into their rooms because, to be frank, the guys working on the tracks sort of hadn't clued into the fact that they were actually working in a residential neighborhood. And I think too that there are uses, like there's legacy uses on the waterfront, where despite the thriving and healthy community on Toronto Islands, it's been there for a century or more. There's still this sort of idea that you're in, especially in the Portlands, that you're in a wilderness of sorts, an urban wilderness. And I'm sure with Villiers Island developing over the next, part of the second half of the decade, that's also going to change. But I think that's perhaps part of it, is that adjusting to the different kind of, reality of the waterfront that's changing.
Yeah, and that's why, having a very open discussion, and I'm sure as David's doing his consultation about what we want on the waterfront, it's always going to be about moderation and trade-offs on some of these things, right?
All right, I'll take another question here. It's from Christopher Hebert. Besides onshore activities, are there plans for on-water activity encouragement?
So, yeah, I would say one of the benefits, we were, when we were looking at Parliament Slip, we started to also engage with Friends of Cherry Beach. And then they actually linked us into a group that they've been part of, which has, I think, 40 different recreational users of the water. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we make it more conducive to having safe uses, recreational and other uses of the water. And, issues of motorboats and shipping challenges in the area, trying to find the right sweet spot where, as climate change continues to have its impact, people are going to gravitate to the water. They're going to want to engage in the water. We know that's going to happen. So the issue is, what are we going to do to make it safe and put some structure around it? So we've started the discussions with those 40 groups, and we hope to actually bring them to the board and to talk through what opportunities there are to activate the waterfront in a very safe manner going forward.
All right. Cynthia Wilkie has a question and a comment. I'll combine them. She says she'd like to take Ed Hoare's question in a slightly different direction. Waterfront Toronto unlocked the key to waterfront revitalization as hoped. Waterfront Toronto has built up the social capital with the organizations of its 3 partners and absolutely with the public, and has delivered fantastic results. Many of us would like to see consideration of making Waterfront Toronto a permanent tripartite waterfront agency with a mandate for revitalization, stewardship, and management of at least the central waterfront. Is that possibility under consideration? That's the question. And to the comment is that she'd like to thank both George and David because Waterfront Toronto and the Waterfront Secretariat have been critical to the successful transformation of the waterfront so far. This work is something to be immensely proud of. We're very lucky to have such committed people and organizations devoted to this massive city building project.
So I have to be frank, I can't answer that without being a little biased. So yes, I think there, obviously is a longer term role. I don't know what permanent is anymore. That should be considered, but I'd leave that to the 3 governments as they start to look at it. The reality though is, we can look longer term and we should have plans longer term, but securing funding usually is more 5 to 8 year kind of trends. So even, getting a 10-year trend and some funding to advance the vision would be great. But there should be, some longer term structure to making sure whatever vision comes forward is implemented. And one of the benefits that Waterfront Toronto had is that, we are an independent corporation, although we do have board members selected by all 3 levels. But part of our job was to actually break through some regulatory challenges and some of the, put pressure on governments, quite frankly, to advance our agendas in a more creative way. So I think there's merit, but at the same time, governments have shorter term visions because of their electoral cycles, and they have to make, more immediate decisions. But I think they see the value in having that longer term vision with Waterfront Toronto.
Okay. I have a question from Mike Music. He's included a link to a Facebook group that people can take a look at, I suppose. But his question is, how much focus in this development is on ecological factors? The question's a bit general, so I don't know how far you can venture on that.
Well, you know what? Here's what I would say. We have a lot of staff that spend a lot of time on the ecological, environmental, we have to go through environmental assessments, and we look at opportunities to advance with the Conservation Authority. Things like, I'm going to talk about the fish habitat. So, we created an area on Villiers, just on the end, where we created a bit of a small fish habitat. The Conservation Authority actually recently brought a camera into it to see what success we've had. And not only have we gotten a lot of fish in that habitat, that they've actually witnessed 3 species that have not been seen in the inner harbor for some time. So I think that's going to continue to be a focal point for Waterfront Toronto and the city and its partners. So I think it's a priority already, and I think it will continue to be a priority.
Ron, the reason why I referenced one of the reasons why I referenced the David Crombie Regeneration report was because of what that report introduced in terms of ecosystem planning, in terms of ecological restoration, ecological value. And, if you sort of go across the city and you look at the work of the Conservation Authority, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, have special units that deal with ecological matters. Lots of citizen groups that are interested in ecology. You have the Friends of the Spit. You have the groups that coalesce around the Dawn. Like the ecological component of all this is very significant.
Okay, thank you. One other quick question, and I think really it probably goes to Ed Hoare. Christopher Hebert is asking, how can I get involved with that water activity discussion? I manage an adult canoe program with 50 paddlers. I know Ed as a paddler. You may want to follow that one up with Christopher Hebert. And then there were a couple of questions about
I'd make a comment there actually, which
yes.
is those latest series of questions touch on 2 things that I think we're going to be talking about in future speaker series. One is this question of animating the water. So when you mention, George, a group of 50 people are interested in animating the water, different ways, which actually I've never heard of. I haven't heard of that group, but that's exactly the kind of presentation we hope to have at some point. People who are interested in whatever. I have a very strong interest in paddling, as you know, and that involves certain things. And there's many other people interested in many other things. And it's important for them to, I think, talk to each other, and also for the city to kind of figure out in Waterfront Toronto, who needs what. Well, how should space be allocated to all those activities to encourage them and nurture them and so on and so forth. With respect to canoeing and kayaking, I've been doing it for years. I'm a big fan. Please get a hold of me. Christopher, I think it is. I don't think I know you, but get a hold of me and we'll talk ad infinitum about it if you want to, I'm sure. So I look
and you know what, Ed, just building on that, we can, we'll work with that group to identify them on our website and maybe pass on that information to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. We were talking, getting different.
Yeah, because Ray Tasak has been coordinating that with us, and there are 40 different organizations, not individuals, but it is exactly the point of, how do we make it safe for all the different competing uses in the water, and encourage more of that activation as well.
Okay, I've got a quick question that I can answer myself. This will be visible, this recorded presentation will be visible online before too long. The other question, can the slide presentations be shared, is a question, I guess, looking for permission to do so from David and George.
Yeah, I have no problem, so that should be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and fine to share mine as well.
Okay, great. And I'll wrap it up with one last question. What is the relationship? This is from Jane Anderson. What is the relationship between Waterfront Toronto and the Waterfront Regeneration Trust? Do you collaborate on projects?
You know what, we have engagement with a number of groups, and we've talked. Are you talking about the Regeneration Trust in terms of our own group?
All I have is the question right there in its form I just read. So
I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
George is a a relative newcomer, and I'm not sure what the recent conversations with the Waterfront Trust might have been, but I would guess that I would be certain that historically there would be conversation and back and forth with the trust and with Waterfront Toronto.
all right, great. Well, I think we've covered the questions that showed up in chat. I guess we'll hand it back there to Edward and he can mediate.
Thank you. Well, for George and David, thank you very, very much for coming this evening and being part of this. And thank you to all of you who've attended. I know at our high point we had 162 people with us this evening, and we still have around 100 right now. So I know people are starting to get ready to leave because it is 8:40, and I just want to again encourage people to go to soon, not perhaps immediately, but soon, with the permission of George and David, we'll have the slide presentations at waterfrontforall.ca. And I just want again to say again, as we did at the beginning, at Waterfront for All, I think we're still thinking of ourselves as an emerging community nonprofit. Our concerns are the accessibility and vibrancy and maintenance and health of the waterfront from the Rouge River to Etobicoke Creek. Obviously, we do spend a lot of focus on the Central Waterfront, just as George and his amazing agency does, because of course that's where a lot of the action's happening. We also have had, and will have again, we've had speaker series and sessions with our friends at the Conservation Authority, who are doing the lion's share of work on the Scarborough waterfront. And that is coming along, and the Scarborough Waterfront project is going to. I understand that they're probably going to start actually doing some physical work on that soon-ish, as soon as as they're able to get to it. I know they've been doing a lot of planning. There's been a great deal of in-depth planning on that, and that of course will affect the accessibility, the erosion, conditions of the waterfront from Bluffers Park to East Point Park. So that's our area of concern. If you're interested, get in touch with us. Go to our website, and email us, send us a note, find us on Facebook and Twitter, and we will also, as Ron said, we will. I can't commit to a specific time frame as Ron did, but we will attempt to put a viable version of this event as a recording up on YouTube and share it through our website. And again, Zoom meetings don't always make, without a bit of magic in the editing suite, don't always make a perfect video, but we'll do our very best to prepare that for people who may have missed it or would like to refer to it again. And so, George, David, thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure. We appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Ron. And I'm going to bid you all adieu and good evening. Bonsoir.
That's great. And thanks everybody for joining.
Good night.
Good night, guys.